Montana Territory, 1878. The snow fell like a burial shroud over Timber Creek, a town clinging to the edge of the frontier where hope fought a daily battle against cruel reality. Quinn Dalton had learned early that a man survived the West by keeping his heart as impenetrable as the mountains that shadowed the valley. At 25, his eyes carried the weathered look of a man who'd seen too much death and too little kindness. Not that anyone could tell from the way he sat his horse, straight-backed and alert, one hand resting casually on his thigh, the other holding the reins with practiced ease. The bitter February wind cut through his worn duster as he guided his chestnut gelding down Timber Creek's main street. 3 years of driving cattle had taught him that attachment was a luxury cowboys couldn't afford. The trail demanded everything: blood, sweat, and too often lives. Love was just another vulnerability, and in Quinn's experience, the West punished vulnerability with swift and merciless precision. A man's only family out here is his horse and his gun, his first trail boss had told him, and Quinn had taken the lesson to heart. What he wanted was simple: enough money from this season's cattle drive to buy a small parcel of land where he could raise horses. Alone, safe, without the complications that came from letting others too close. Yet in his quietest moments, when the campfire had burned down to embers and the night sky unfurled like a blanket of diamonds above him, Quinn felt the emptiness spreading inside him like a shadow. What he needed, though he'd never admit it, was something to fill that hollow space, something more permanent than the next town, the next drive, the next dollar. The general store's bell jangled as Quinn pushed through the door, stomping snow from his boots. He needed supplies before heading to the Double R Ranch, where he'd hired on for the winter, just long enough to wait out the snow before joining a spring cattle drive northward. "Be with you in a moment," called a voice from behind the counter, melodic and warm like honey in summer. Quinn removed his hat, revealing sandy brown hair in need of a trim. He ran a hand over the light stubble on his jaw as his eyes adjusted to the dimmer light inside the store. When they did, his breath caught in his throat. The young woman organizing items behind the counter couldn't have been more than 22, with dark blonde hair pulled back in a practical knot at the nape of her neck, though rebellious tendrils had escaped to frame a face that made Quinn temporarily forget the cold outside. Her simple blue calico dress emphasized a slender waist, and when she looked up, her eyes were the precise color of the Montana sky in late spring, a blue that promised warmth after too much winter. "Can I help you find something?" she asked, and Quinn realized he'd been staring. "Supplies," he managed, heading out to the Double R. Her smile widened. "The Ramsey's place. I'm Julia Mercer. My father owns this store and the Ramseys are good customers." She extended her hand and Quinn found himself taking it before he could think better of it. Her skin was soft but her grip firm, not the tentative touch of an Eastern lady, but the handshake of a woman who understood frontier life. "Quinn Dalton," he replied, dropping her hand quickly when he realized he'd held it too long. As Quinn gathered his supplies, the door burst open, bringing with it a flurry of snow, and a man whose expensive coat and Eastern manner immediately set Quinn's teeth on edge. "Miss Mercer," the man said, ignoring Quinn entirely, "I've come to escort you to the town meeting. Your father mentioned you'd be attending." Julia's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Mr. Hargrove, I'm afraid I'm still tending the store. Perhaps I'll see you there." The man, Hargrove, looked pointedly at the clock. "The meeting starts in 20 minutes. Surely you can close up shop early on such an important occasion." Before Julia could respond, a crash from the storeroom had all three turning toward the sound. A cry of pain followed. "Father!" Julia rushed past them, and Quinn, without thinking, followed. In the storeroom, an older man lay on the floor, a heavy crate overturned beside him, its contents scattered. Julia knelt beside him as he clutched his leg, his face contorted in pain. "It's broken," Quinn said after a quick examination. "We need to get him to a doctor." Hargrove hovered uselessly in the doorway. "I'll fetch the doctor," he finally offered, disappearing. Quinn helped move Mr. Mercer to a cot in the back room, and when the doctor arrived, the prognosis was as expected, a clean break that would heal, but the man wouldn't walk without assistance for at least 2 months. "How will we manage the store?" Mr. Mercer asked, his face drawn with pain and worry. "The spring shipments are coming, and the books." "I'll handle it, Father," Julia insisted, though concern shadowed her eyes. That evening, as Quinn prepared to leave for the Double R, Julia followed him outside. The snow had stopped, and the setting sun cast the white-covered town in shades of pink and gold. "Mr. Dalton," she called, her breath visible in the frigid air, "I have a proposition for you." Quinn turned, one foot already in the stirrup. My father needs help with the store at least until spring, she said, clutching her shawl tighter around her shoulders. The Ramseys won't be doing much ranching until the thaw anyway. Would you consider working here instead? We can offer room and board plus wages. Every instinct told Quinn to refuse. Getting involved meant complications. Yet something in her steadfast gaze made him pause. Just until spring, he said finally, the words feeling like surrender and possibility all at once. Julia's smile bloomed then, genuine and warm, reaching her eyes in a way that made Quinn's chest tighten strangely. Just until spring, she agreed. But that smile made him wonder, for the first time in years, what it might be like to stay somewhere longer than a season, to build something that wouldn't disappear with the next winter snow or summer drought. That night in the small room above the Mercer's store, Quinn lay awake listening to the wind. He'd made a mistake in accepting, he was certain. The frontier wasn't kind to those who put down roots. He'd seen too many crosses marking the graves of those who tried. Yet when morning came, he found himself rising before dawn, eager to begin the day in a way that had nothing to do with duty and everything to do with the knowledge that Julia would be downstairs, her spring sky eyes and quiet strength creating a warmth that challenged everything he thought he knew about survival in the West. The first weeks at Mercer's general store proved Quinn right about complications. Edmund Hargrove, the banker's son, made frequent appearances, his interest in Julia obvious to everyone except, it seemed, Julia herself. He's been pursuing her for months, Mr. Mercer confided one afternoon as Quinn helped him adjust his splinted leg. Thinks his father's money makes him entitled to the prettiest girl in Timber Creek. Quinn said nothing, though his jaw tightened at the thought. February gave way to March, and with each passing day, Quinn found his defenses weakening. Julia moved through the store with quiet efficiency, handling difficult customers with grace and treating the poorest homesteaders with the same respect as the wealthiest ranchers. She knew everyone's names, their children, their struggles, and they adored her for it. "You're good at this," she remarked one evening as they closed up shop. "Better than I expected a cowboy to be at bookkeeping." Quinn shrugged, uncomfortable with the compliment. "Numbers make sense, they don't change on you." "Unlike people," she tilted her head, studying him with those clear blue eyes. "Unlike everything out here," he replied, gesturing vaguely toward the window where the Montana wilderness stretched beyond the town's boundaries. The weather turns, rivers flood, outlaws raid, Indians attack. A man survives by expecting the worst. "That's a lonely way to live," Julia said quietly. "It's kept me alive." "There's a difference between living and just surviving, Quinn Dalton." She touched his arm briefly before turning away, but the warmth of her fingers lingered like a brand against his skin. That night Quinn dreamed of a homestead nestled in a protected valley, horses grazing in green pastures, and a woman with spring sky eyes watching him from a porch. He woke before dawn, unsettled by how fiercely he wanted that impossible dream. The turning point came in late March when a late-season blizzard descended without warning. Quinn had ridden to the Double R to check on preparations for the spring drive when the storm hit, turning the world white and dangerous in minutes. He barely made it back to town, his horse struggling through drifts that reached its chest. When he staggered through the store's door, half frozen and exhausted, Julia cried out in relief. "I thought you were lost out there," she admitted, helping him remove his ice-encrusted coat. "We've had 3 travelers already seek shelter." The blizzard raged for 2 days, trapping everyone in place. The store became a refuge for stranded townsfolk, and Quinn watched as Julia organized sleeping arrangements, rationed food, and kept spirits high with her quiet confidence. On the second night, when most had finally fallen asleep, Quinn found her sitting alone by the stove, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders, staring into the flames. "You should rest," he said, sitting beside her. "I keep thinking about the Carmichael family," she replied. "Their homestead is so isolated, I pray they had enough firewood." "You can't save everyone, Julia." She turned to him, her face solemn in the firelight. "But we must try, mustn't we? Otherwise, what's the point of any of this?" She gestured to the sleeping figures around them. "The West isn't just about survival, Quinn. It's about building something worth surviving for." Something shifted in Quinn then, a crack in the wall he'd built around himself. "What are you building, Julia Mercer?" She was silent for a long moment, a place where people look after each other. Where the frontier becomes a home, not just a battleground. Her eyes met his. "What about you? What will you do when spring comes?" Before he could answer, a commotion outside drew their attention. Voices called urgently and Quinn reached the door first. 4 men stood in the snowy street, supporting a 5th between them. Carmichael, one gasped, found him half frozen, trying to reach town. Says his family's trapped, roof collapsed under the snow. The next hours passed in a blur. Quinn organized a rescue party, ignoring Julia's worried eyes as he prepared to ride out. The storm had passed, but the temperature had plummeted, making the 15-mile journey to the Carmichael homestead deadly serious. "Be careful," Julia whispered as Quinn mounted up. "I always am," he replied, but something in her expression made him add, "I'll come back." The rescue proved more harrowing than anticipated. They found Mrs. Carmichael and her 3 children huddled in the root cellar, their cabin partially collapsed, their firewood nearly gone. Getting them back to town tested every skill Quinn possessed, but when they finally rode into Timber Creek the following evening, Julia was waiting, her face lighting with relief when she saw him. Later, after the Carmichaels were settled with the doctor, Quinn found Julia in the storeroom, weeping silently. "They're safe," he said awkwardly, unused to offering comfort. "Because of you," she replied, wiping her tears. "You could have died out there. Wouldn't be the first time I've faced long odds. Is that all it was to you? Another risk, another day on the frontier?" Quinn hesitated, then spoke the truth he'd been avoiding. "No. It mattered because it mattered to you." She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the faint freckles across her nose, smell the lavender she used to scent her clothes. Why should that matter to Quinn Dalton, who trusts nothing and no one? "Because you've made me question everything I thought I knew," he admitted, the words feeling like both surrender and freedom. "You've made me wonder if there might be something worth staying for." The moment hung between them, fragile and full of possibility, until the bell above the store's door jangled, breaking the spell. April arrived, bringing with it the first real thaw and the deadline Quinn had set for himself. Spring cattle drives would be forming soon, and he had always planned to join one, to continue his solitary journey toward that small piece of land he could call his own. Yet each day the thought of leaving became more difficult. He found reasons to linger, inventory that needed organizing, shelves that needed building, a delivery wagon that needed repair. Mr. Mercer was healing well but still needed assistance, and the spring shipments were arriving daily, keeping the store busier than ever. And then there was Julia. She never mentioned his departure, but sometimes he caught her watching him with an expression that made his chest ache with unfamiliar longing. The revelation that changed everything came unexpectedly. Quinn was helping unload a delivery when he overheard Hargrove speaking to another man outside the bank. "You've told me repeatedly that attachment is dangerous, that a man survives by moving on. Why should I expect anything different?" The truth of her words struck Quinn like a physical blow. He had kept one foot out the door from the moment he arrived, protecting himself from the very connection he now realized he desperately wanted. "What if I was wrong?" he asked quietly. Julia's eyes widened. "About what?" "Everything." Quinn took a step toward her. "What if the real danger isn't in staying, but in never finding something worth staying for?" Before she could respond, hoofbeats pounded down the street, and a rider pulled up sharply before the store. "Fire!" the man shouted. "The livery's ablaze, and it's spreading fast." The next hours were chaos as the entire town fought to contain the fire. Quinn worked alongside everyone else, organizing bucket lines, helping evacuate buildings in the fire's path, and finally collapsing in exhaustion when dawn broke and the last embers were extinguished. Half the commercial district was damaged or destroyed. The Mercer's store had escaped the worst, but smoke damage was extensive, and part of the back storeroom had caught before they'd managed to douse it. As Quinn helped assess the damage, Marshal Phillips approached with a grim expression. "This wasn't accidental," he said in a low voice. "Found evidence of coal oil at the livery. Someone started this deliberately." "Who would do such a thing?" Julia asked, overhearing as she distributed coffee to the exhausted firefighters. The marshal shook his head. "Can't say for certain, but there have been rumors of land speculators looking to buy up Timber Creek property cheap. A fire's one way to force folks to sell." Quinn's mind immediately went to Hargrove's words about forcing the Mercers to sell. He said nothing, needing proof before making accusations, but he noticed how Julia's face had paled. That afternoon, as they worked to clean the smoke damage, Quinn made a decision. "I'm staying," he said simply. Julia paused in her scrubbing. "What?" I'm staying in Timber Creek. At least until your father's back on his feet completely and the store is repaired. He met her eyes steadily, just until spring is properly here. Spring is already here, Quinn, she pointed out, gesturing to the buds visible on the trees outside the window. Then I suppose I'll need a better reason to stay, he replied, his heart pounding as he took this leap into the unknown. Julia's smile then was like sunrise after the longest night, tentative at first, then brilliantly hopeful. It made Quinn dare to imagine a future he'd never permitted himself to want. The fire investigation revealed the truth within days. A drifter confessed to setting the blaze for money, and while he refused to name his employer, letters found in his possession implicated Edmund Hargrove in a scheme to depress property values throughout the town. When confronted by Marshal Phillips, Hargrove fled, taking a substantial amount of the bank's money with him. The scandal rocked Timber Creek, but it also united the town in recovery efforts. For Quinn and the Mercers, the revelation brought both relief and new challenges. With Hargrove gone, the elder Mr. Hargrove, ashamed of his son's actions, renegotiated the store's loan with generous terms. Yet the fire had destroyed inventory they could ill afford to replace, and many townspeople were struggling to rebuild, limiting their purchasing power. "We'll manage," Julia insisted one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. "Timber Creek has survived worse." Quinn was silent for a moment, then said, "I've been thinking." "A dangerous pastime," she teased. "I've saved most of my wages over the years," he continued. "It was meant for a piece of land someday, but I'm thinking it might be better invested here." Julia turned to him, her expression carefully guarded. "What do you mean?" "A partnership in the store," Quinn met her gaze. "Your father handles the books, you manage the customers, and I could expand the operation, add a freight service to bring goods to outlying ranches and homesteads, maybe start a small horse-breaking business on the side." "You'd invest your savings in our store." "After everything you've said about not putting down roots." Quinn took her hand, an intimacy he wouldn't have dared weeks before. "I've spent my life believing the frontier is no place for permanent connections. That a man survives by staying detached, ready to move on when danger threatens." He smiled ruefully. "But I've watched you these past months, building community in a place where most people just try to survive. And I've realized something." "What's that?" Julia asked softly. "The West isn't just about enduring, it's about building something worth fighting for." He squeezed her hand. "I want to build something here, Julia, with you and your father. If you'll have me." The hope in her eyes nearly undid him. "Just as a business partner." Quinn's throat tightened. "If that's all you want, yes, but I'm hoping for more in time." "How much time?" "As long as it takes," he said honestly. "I'm not going anywhere." Julia's smile then was like a promise, making Quinn hope for things he'd never dared want before: a home, a family, a future shared with someone who made the harshness of the frontier seem conquerable. "I accept your partnership offer, Quinn Dalton," she said formally, though her eyes danced with deeper emotion. "On one condition." "Name it." "That you understand I'm agreeing to much more than a business arrangement." Quinn's heart thundered in his chest. Slowly giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers, a kiss as gentle as dawn breaking over the mountains. When he pulled back, the wonder in her eyes reflected his own. The months that followed transformed Timber Creek and Quinn Dalton alike. The town rebuilt, stronger than before. Mercer and Dalton General Store expanded, adding the freight service Quinn had envisioned. By late summer, Mr. Mercer was walking without a cane and openly delighting in the courtship between his daughter and his new business partner. On a golden September afternoon, Quinn rode out to the piece of land he'd finally purchased, not for himself alone, as he'd once planned, but as the foundation for a shared dream. The small valley cradled by protective hills offered rich grazing for horses, with a clear stream running through its heart and enough timber to build a solid house. When he brought Julia to see it the following day, her eyes filled with tears as she took in the meadow dotted with late wildflowers. "It's perfect," she whispered. Quinn took her hands in his. "I've spent my whole life moving, Julia, running from attachment because I believed it was the only way to survive out here." He gestured to the valley around them. "But you taught me that surviving isn't enough. A man needs something worth surviving for." He knelt then, his heart more exposed than it had ever been during any frontier danger. I came to Timber Creek planning to stay just until spring, but your smile made me hope for forever. He held up a simple gold band. Julia Mercer, will you make that hope real? Will you marry me? Her yes echoed across the valley, carrying with it the promise of a future neither had believed possible in the harshness of the frontier. A future built on the understanding that true strength comes not from isolation, but from the courage to build connections that endure through winter's hardship and summer's bounty alike. By the following spring, a small house stood in the valley, and the Mercer and Dalton General Store had become the heart of Timber Creek's commercial district. Quinn still rode the occasional cattle drive when extra hands were needed, but he always returned to Julia, to their growing business, to the home they were building together. On their wedding day, as they stood before the town that had become family, Quinn finally understood the truth that had eluded him for so long. The frontier wasn't just a place to endure or escape, it was a place to build, to grow, to love. And in Julia's spring sky eyes, he found not just a reason to stay, but the home he'd been searching for all along.